no one has ever triggered you. So there's nothing to heal from. What the opportunity is to listen to what triggers in you that gets quote unquote turned on by somebody saying or doing something. That immediately gets you out of the victim mindset. But there's no trigger, do you see? So maybe right there you can find some more freedom for yourself to realize no one triggers us. We trigger us. And that right there is where we get power and responsibility back.
I'm Luke, and you're listening to the Luke Mind Power Podcast.
Welcome back, everyone. It's amazing to have you with us again. I have someone, I normally say I've got someone extraordinary, but this dude, Peter Crone, this is beyond extraordinary. Peter has inspired me so much, and it's just extraordinary to have him on the podcast. He is the mind architect, and his purpose is to, help people remove suffering and really discover freedom in their life. And I met Peter a couple of years ago through Instagram. I saw one of his posts and it just resonated with me so much. And yeah, now 2 years later, I want to welcome Peter Crone to the Luke Mind Power Podcast. It's a blessing to have you on the podcast, man.
Luke, thank you for the kind words. Even with my pretty vast lexicon, I'm trying to figure out what's beyond extraordinary, but maybe someone in the audience will come up with something.
I've heard a lot of your story, and, I know that, I guess challenges are part of life, and I think a lot of people try to avoid the pain most of the time with life, but, your story, losing your dad, and there's obviously a lot more that you've gone through to get to this level of being able to be so prolific in the way that you help people. Would you be able to take us to that moment for you where you kind of did have a bit of an awakening that, like, my purpose is bigger than being a trainer, And I know you said you're working with Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman. Is that right? You were traveling with them?
Yes, I was for about 5 years. That was my former career.
Yeah. So was there a moment there where you were like, okay, it's time for me to move on from that and to step into helping people in the way that you do right now? Because you inspired me, you woke me up a lot, and now you're doing it on obviously a larger scale. You got retreats and masterminds, and you're making more of an impact.
For sure. And again, I appreciate the generous words. I, was enjoying my life as a trainer, and very similar to yourself, wanted to be well versed in many disciplines. So I became a Pilates instructor and a yoga instructor, and I just basically wanted to be the best I could be in terms of being of service, in this case to a couple of actors, which was fun. But I went through, as many of us do, like a tough period where I went through a breakup, and without going into all the details, because if anyone wants to hear it, they can listen to many of the podcasts I've been on. But basically what it brought to the surface was this profound fear of loss, because both my parents had died when I was quite young. My mum when I was 7, and as you mentioned, my dad passed when I was about 17. So being an only child, that was obviously quite dramatic and significant pivot point in my life where I suddenly was just by myself. So you don't have to be a rocket scientist to recognize that as a human being, we tend to try and avoid pain, and we're drawn to pleasure. And so at that point, I established a lot of pain around the fear of loss, having arguably the two most important people in my life suddenly gone. And so later in life, I'm now 28, 29, and I meet this girl, fall head over heels in love. And unbeknownst to me, much of my coping mechanism, which we tend to develop through childhood trauma, was, basically being the perfect boyfriend as a means to avoiding, hopefully, her leaving me, which was really my own mechanism of trying to avoid the pain of loss again. So that didn't work, because life is always going to do what it can to help us evolve and break free. So it set me up perfectly to go through some really serious suffering when she left, and I got to revisit that old scar of the fear of loss. And I was just sitting in my apartment in Santa Monica, California, when after about 2 months of not being able to sleep and losing weight and calling all of my mates, trying to figure out how to get it back, I had this huge epiphany. My mind had been preoccupied with these incessant questions like, where is she? Is she dating somebody else? Will I see her again? Will I find love like that again? The sort of the usual suspects that anyone can relate to if they've been through a hard breakup. And in one sort of glimmer of divine intervention, I got the answer to all of the questions, which was, I don't know. I don't know where she is. I don't know if she's with someone else. I don't know if I'll see her again. And I don't know if I'd find love like that again. And it just occurred on me that the very nature of life itself is uncertainty. That's its actual structure. And so I simultaneously got the futility of the human ego, which is always trying to figure out what's going to happen as a means of security. So I stopped doing that because that was futile, because we don't know. And for the first time in my life, I was totally at peace, being completely clueless. And the experience of freedom that cascaded through my body was like nothing I'd ever experienced, nothing that I even knew was possible. And that changed the trajectory of my life. And I started, all the work that I get to do now, because it was sort of, without sounding too celluloid and Hollywood-like, I got to see the matrix. I got to see the code that people are stuck in, the linguistic fortresses that people are oblivious to but drive their lives, the I'm not enoughs, and I'm not loved, and I'm a failure, and I'm useless, and whatever it is at the deep level of the subconscious that then drives the anxiety, the depression, the addictions, the self-sabotage, the debt that people get into, and everything. It all just became so categorically clear to me. So that's what happened.
The uncertainty, and it's like everyone wants to know everything.
Yeah.
It's the truth. It's a fact. I don't know. And that was like your peace.
Yeah. Complete
to move forward.
Peace and freedom to me are sort of synonymous, which we could also say is bedfellows with love too, because I had a new profound gratitude for life, where that part of me, which we all have, I just call it the ego. Ego gets a bad rap, like, oh, you've got to get rid of your ego. And it's really, it's you can't get rid of it. It's your identity, your name. You think you're a certain height and a certain weight and all of this stuff. And it's just that part of us that's scared, it's primal, that wants to survive. And as a result, one of the coping strategies, the mechanisms by which we try to survive, is people are ruminating all day trying to figure out what's going to happen. Am I going to be okay? Am I going to get enough money for rent? Am I going to fill in the blank, right? And it's exhausting. And so I went from that very not extraordinary, very ordinary way of living, and realized that I'm totally clueless. And there was a much deeper level of just peace and trust beneath that, when I realized I don't need to know. And that doesn't mean that my life was always perfect from that moment. Obviously, I've faced many obstacles and challenges, but I also have reframed those as opportunities for growth. Like, there was never anything to fear, because the only thing that was generating my fear was my own imagination. And when people understand that, it's super, super profound.
It is. It's ridiculous. it's all there. It's all mental, right? So what you experienced with the loss of your parents, do you think that basically promoted the reason why you felt this feeling of, fearing of losing someone, that deep fear?
Yeah, because, first of all, now with my upgraded understanding of life, I didn't lose my parents, right? So my parents passed, my parents died, however you want to categorize it.
Yep.
The narrative of loss is simply that. It's a narrative. It's a story. It's not a truth. So up until such time that I went through this epiphany about 28, 29 years old, I was, like most people, stuck in the story of loss. Like, even friends, right, growing up, they'd be like, oh my gosh, so sorry for your loss. I could meet a stranger and they're like, oh, where's your family? Do you go back to England for the holidays? Whatever, everyday common conversations. And I'd be like, well, no, actually, I don't have parents. And they're like, oh, sorry for your loss. It's just, it's part of the vernacular of being a human being. You tend to associate someone dying as a loss, which I understand. It's just not accurate. And so when I went through the experience I went through, I realized there's no such thing as loss. Like in the realm of the quantum field or even in the manifest world, energy just transforms. It goes from one form to the next. There's no actual loss. Like we've been chatting for all of like 10 minutes, if that. And we've lost millions of cells, but, like in our body, neither of us seem to be freaking out about it, right? So when you understand that life on the manifest level is in constant flux, it's never static. And so when for me, I realized that the pain I was feeling, and hence the fear, to answer your question, that was the precursor to me worrying about having that pain again, in this case through the form of a girlfriend, was all based in fiction. And once I realized there was nothing to lose, then that's when I recognized the freedom that was beneath the story. And ironically, within 15 minutes of me having that epiphany, she called me. I hadn't spoken to her for 7 or 8 weeks. And now she's crying, saying, I miss you so much, which to me was just phenomenal because it spoke to entanglement theory, which is at that moment of me letting down my guard, my ego, my identity's fear, which itself was a superstition, I became available. Because before, even though we had a beautiful relationship and it really was lovely and I was a great boyfriend, the underlying energy was me trying to be the perfect boyfriend to mitigate the loss, which was me in a relationship with my own fear. So really there wasn't an actual relationship authentically, which is why most relationships don't work, because most people are functioning from their own fears of whatever it is. And so at that moment, I was literally fully available to her. And she called me from across the other side of the planet, from New Zealand. I was in LA. Like, she couldn't be physically further. Why is it within 15 minutes of me having that revelation, did she suddenly call? I mean, that to me spoke literally to the quantum realm. And it was so profound. I literally at that moment became available. So yes, the previous narrative of the fear of loss did drive the behavior of me trying to avoid that again. But in trying to avoid a pain that we've had from our past, all we're doing is sustaining its inevitability, right? So I reconciled all of it. I realized there was no loss, therefore there's no pain, and therefore there's nothing to fear around the story of loss. I miss my parents. I love my parents. They died. It was sad. That's all normal. But I didn't lose them. If anything, I could argue that I found a shit ton through them because they loved and adored me. So, it's all about how you contextualize your experience.
How did you heal that wound for yourself to feel? Because you can naturally, right? A relationship breaks down, doesn't work. There's a fear of you losing, you do. And then how do you process that in terms of the feeling of rejection, for example, right? I'm not enough. I've been myself through so many freaking relationships that like rejection after rejection. And I believe at some point there was such a big fear of losing that person. And that's exactly what I attracted, right?
Yeah,
it was
cool.
just overbearing. But how did you process that? And how did you heal from that experience to be able to, move forward, feel confident, content in who you are, know your worth, and not fall into that kind of like trap again of like, I'm afraid to lose that person if I'm with them. I'm changing myself from me being authentic to me conforming to what they want me to be like, because I think that's something that so many people do.
Oh, of course. That's why most relationships don't work, or at least there's contention or underlying stress or manipulation and control and all the things that people do. So there was nothing to heal. That's the thing, because the trauma and the pain that I had was fictitious, right? So you've got to understand that the narrative of loss is just that. It's a narrative. It's not an actual truth. So when you discover the actual truth of your experience, there's no pain there. Pain is always associated with the ego's interpretation of life, not life itself. So there was nothing for me to heal. It all got healed instantaneously, just like that, because the healing that would have been required, first of all, would never have been sufficient, because you can't heal a lie, right? So the lie was that I lost my parents, which created the feeling of suffering and pain, which I would have, as an everyday human being, been trying to, one, avoid, which is how my relationship was founded, and then two, try to heal from. But when I realized there's nothing to heal from because I didn't lose my parents, the whole story falls apart. That's why one of my mantras or my catchphrases is I don't solve people's problems, I dissolve them. When you dissolve a problem, then, well, you don't need healing because you realize you never had a problem in the first place. Every single problem that people have belongs entirely, exclusively to their perception, which is an identity based in some form of inadequacy, insecurity, or scarcity. And all of those fundamental structures of the ego are based in pretense. They're not truths.
But the emotional pain, what about that? Because, I mean, obviously that is there an emotional attachment? There's a feeling within that of the passing, right?
Of course,
so,
yeah.
It's a story or it's a fact, right? But there's also the feeling within yourself that, this is what's happened. So is it just like that you switch the way that you perceive things and all of a sudden you're changing your emotions and feelings, so it's gone?
100%. So let's make a distinction first. I think feelings are natural. We're sentient beings. We feel, right? That's why I said earlier, I could miss my parents and I was sad that they died, right? That's natural. It's actually beautiful. We could argue it's an extension of love, right? But the emotions, I would argue, are based in time. They're accumulated from hurt and suffering and fear, where those are entirely the extension of the ego. So all of my emotion and emotions were absolutely inextricably connected to the part of me, my ego, that was founded in the story of loss. Once I saw the story itself was fictitious, there was no foundation of truth in it, then the emotions that are associated with that dissipate instantaneously. And ironically, in the absence of these fictitious emotions, I was able to really access true feeling. Because feeling's beautiful. Like, to feel is to be human. But feelings, when they're really like genuine and authentic, are, I would always say, an extension of some form of love. Even if it's grief, right, over the fact that someone you love died. Like, I'm not saying you become robotic and like, oh, well, they just died, I'll get on with my life, right? Like, I still today miss my dad. I was telling a story in a podcast the other day about how a friend had, said at college when I was first there, like, he didn't believe that my parents died because I seemed so together. And just feeling and recounting that story, like it brought tears to my eyes of how beautiful it was, both that I was able to move on with my life, but he was able to recognize and reflect such, generous view of me, even in the face of hardship. He said, like, you could easily have become bitter or a drunk or fuck life, and so that's a beautiful feeling. But most people get stuck in emotions, which are an extension of, I said, their ego, which is founded in some sort of lack or inadequacy or insecurity. So the feelings were actually more profound and beautiful. The feeling of gratitude for a dad who just adored me, who loved me. The feeling of, pride for who I'd become in the face of adversity. But the emotions around the fear of loss, the anxiety, the depression, the anger, the things that people experience, all of that just literally vanished because they are only commensurate with the story that's based in pretense. Once the story is revealed, then for what it is, which is a lie, then the associated emotions have no ground to stand on. I mean, the example I give is like 2,000 plus years ago, people thought the world was flat. Now, within that context, within that narrative, the associated fear, which makes complete sense, is I don't want to fall off the edge, right? That literally is commensurate with the perspective. Now, so there's a lot of emotion there. Like, imagine if you, back then, you thought you were near the edge and someone was trying to push you, you would have become violent. You would have punched them. You would have protected yourself. You would have had anger. These emotions would have been associated with your fear relative to the context of the world is flat, right? You follow? But as soon as you realize, well, hang on, no, it's not, even though I guess it's still a debate nowadays. I can't keep up, but there's a lot of flat earthers out there.
100%.
Right? Yeah. But let's just, for the sake of making the point, let's say, no, we are on a globe, or at least there's gravity. I mean, try and jump off the fucking world, right? If you're an athlete, I'll give you 3 feet. If you're not, maybe 18 inches, and then you come straight back down, right? So when you realize that previous context of the world is flat is a lie, it gets dismissed. As it gets dismissed, what goes with it? The fear of falling off the edge. Just gone, vanished. Because it was only pertinent to the previous frame of reference. Once the frame of reference gets dismissed, then so do the associated emotions. So for me, everything that was linked to the story of loss, which was the fear and, manipulation's an ugly word. I never really manipulated my girlfriend, but if you look at it, I was trying to be the perfect boyfriend as a means to avoiding her leaving me. So it looked good on the surface, and she was the beneficiary of poetry and flowers and stuff for no reason, but the underlying energy was still being driven by fear. So it wasn't authentic.
Yeah, your story's very relatable. I mean, to probably many people as well, but even myself. And it's kind of what I went through as well. And I had to press pause on relationships for the last 5 years because I realized that I'd lost myself, in the influences of the world, your friends, what's going, I have 3 older sisters. They were all married at the time, surrounding myself with all my friends who were also in relationships. And so I was even settling for relationships and people that weren't even right for me. But because of the environment and what everybody else is doing, you settle. And so I changed that to, I'm not settling for less just because I'm impatient to wait for better. I'm not settling for less just because it's available. So I had to go through a process of building a stronger, loving relationship with myself because I never had that. And I was always giving love, but never took the time to learn to love myself. And that was something that really I struggled with, this whole physical body, even though, you're not your body, your energy, but, you're a spiritual being. And the whole perception of what you're supposed to look like and what you look like in the mirror, which I believe so many people and so many of us struggle with, the fear of judgment, the fear of, not feeling good enough or the feeling inadequate, right? And I would stand out because I was so lanky and skinny all my life up until late 20s. So that insecurity ate away at me for so many freaking years. And I went through so many experiences of being triggered and bullied and called names. And then to amount to that, it's the rejections and my parents not leaving me, but moving to another city and me feeling as if they didn't care about me. Everything that's happened to me has been a blessing. It's driven me, it's hurt me, it's fueled me. So I'm curious, what's your biggest pain point now that is your biggest motivation?
It's a great question, and I appreciate your vulnerability about what you went through. I'm sure many of the listeners can relate because we all, I would assert, are born with those constraints of not being enough or fear of rejection or the fear of judgment. All of those are very human, but I would assert if you take a closer look, there's no such thing as judgment other than how we perceive ourselves, right? People say things, and people say really mean things, and people say very hurtful things. But that's really an expression of their own discomfort. It's not something to do with us, even if it's directed at us. The words they use can trigger the words that we have, right? And that's a very subtle distinction. I tell people, one of my quotes is say, other people's words can only hurt you to the degree that you already believe them, right? So I'm not saying if someone came up to me and said, hey, you're a fucking idiot or you're an asshole, that it would be an enjoyable experience, but it's not going to have one iota of effect on me because that's not my view of myself, right? So that's where the rejection story is equally fictitious. No one's ever rejected you, Luke. They've said things, and then because you at some level have decided to reject yourself, which is, human, and we have compassion for that, then that triggers where you already have some dialogue of judgment about yourself, right? So that's the first thing for people to understand, is because as long as you think someone else is judging you, then you have no choice but to be a victim of life. And then we do what we can to avoid those people. We will move away from people. We'll not talk to people. Meanwhile, the very thing that hurt us is still in us. And now we just don't have those people in our life. So that's the first thing. Doesn't mean you want to hang out with people who are, dark energy or dismissive or derogatory or disrespectful. But they're not the ones hurting you. They're the ones who are hurt. And their words just carry that underlying sense of suffering, which then may trigger whoever's listening if they haven't reconciled their own constraint. So to answer your question, what triggers me now is less about me. I become, without sounding too philanthropic, my driving motivator is that I just care. I care about humanity. I care about how much suffering is out there. I care about, right now, these last 2 to 3 years, the amount of tyranny, the amount of corruption, the amount of crime, the amount of lies, the amount of genocide that's going on, the amount of sex trafficking that is horrific, the assault on women that is happening, not just in household domestic abuse, but, the fact that a dude can walk into a bathroom if he wants to identify as a woman and put women at risk, So these are the things that I care about. I wouldn't say they're triggers because there are things that are just out of my control. I have a voice to a certain degree, and I will use it, and I'll be a stand for, harmony and respect and love and freedom and sovereignty. I will be a stand for all of these things. But I also am sufficiently aware of the lack of impact that we can have as individuals sometimes. And so if there's anything that sometimes for me is difficult, it's being so aware as I am to see the mechanisms that are at play and the lies and the propaganda through media and corrupt politicians all over the world. I mean, I know you're in Australia. It's been horrific there. It's been hideous here in the States, like one of the most evil administrations that we've ever had. And it's just tough to witness that when millions of people's lives are at stake. So that's the only thing that I would say, kind of sometimes keeps me up at night is what can I do to be of service and make a difference for people?
I resonate. I understand exactly what you're talking about. I see a lot of the content that you share on your stories, and it's not easy to share that kind of information given how divided the world is, really, But yeah, I there is a quote that that says, no one is more feared than the one who speaks the truth. And and you got to have courage to do that. You got to have confidence to do that, to go against what many people believe, But Peter, when I first came across you back in 2021, I was living at my parents' house, hadn't started my coaching program yet that I do. And I remember watching one of your videos and I was just like listening to you and I was like, far out. and it really got me. But there was one quote, and I've haven't stolen this, but I've used this many times with my clients. And it says, life will present you with people and circumstances to reveal where you're not free. And then there's another one, which is, and it's like, it's so true. Life is always, it's always happening. It's clearly showing you constantly, it's like, but we're not paying attention. What is the lack of self-worth, lack of self-confidence, lack of self-awareness, right? We're scared to be alone, this whole fear of being alone. So I sacrifice myself to be in a toxic or manipulative relationship, or because I've got kids and so I can't leave the relationship, but it's clearly the universe is showing you that, and life is presenting you with situations and experiences constantly to prick you and say, hey, you need to move. But we're not paying attention, right? Yes. I know. I bet you know which one I'm talking about as well. Because you've posted it, you've reposted again, and it was something that you posted a couple of years ago, and it says, what happened and couldn't happen any other way because it didn't. What happened, and it couldn't have happened any other way because it didn't. Like, that is just like so clear as daylight. But we really get stuck in what happened. and it's like it's almost like you're freeing people's mind just by that quote. Like that's how powerful that is. What exactly have you been reading, and where did your articulation come from? Because the way that you speak is really profound, and there's like, obviously we're all authentic, and I know that it's like, well, there's no other Luke Mind Power out there that speaks like me and does what I do. But I'm sure that everybody would agree who's paying attention to and watching this or listening to this that you really go so deep that people probably have to listen to this a few times to actually understand like what you're actually saying.
Yeah. And again, I appreciate the reflection, and it's not something that I can claim stake to, like, yes, I did that, right? I would assert that at the same time I overcame the fear of loss. My ego didn't die so much as it got integrated. And for whatever reason, at that point, I tapped into a deeper intelligence. And I feel like I'm the beneficiary of that, and I'm incredibly humbled by it and grateful for it. And that's why I feel it's incumbent upon me to share those words, those insights, whatever wisdom that I have been fortunate enough to stumble across, seems to be touching people, millions of people around the world, and it's incredibly humbling. So yeah, those particular quotes, two of my favorites as well, because they're both so profound. I've actually heard from many people who've tattooed both of them. One of the most moving stories was a gentleman who had tried to commit suicide a number of times, and he was a cutter, so he cut his forearms multiple times, had a good dozen or so scars on his forearm. And he heard me on a podcast say that quote of what happened, and couldn't have happened any other way, because it didn't. And like most people, sounds like you too, a light goes on, and the way I would describe what occurs is it's the complete reconciliation of your history, right? It's true surrender to every moment of your life to this point. And there's a piece that is so profound in that when people really get, because the human brain, which is based, the ego particularly is based in time, really believes that, well, I could have done this, or I should have done that, or I shouldn't have done this, or whatever happened to me when I was a kid was terrible, and that's why I'm fucked up. And there's this perpetual story about our history that leaves people in a state of unrest. And when you really understand the truth, just the physics, right? That's why the quote came through me. It's not an opinion. It's not Peter Crone's idea. I'm just pointing out universal principles that are based truly in physics. And that's why it resonates with people, because, if you listen to someone talk about the South Beach diet or something, like, it's not really a truth. It's an opinion, and it might work for some people, but for some people, it's the blood type diet works for that. It's based in human dialogue. It's not universal truth. And where I feel my words make a difference is because it's beyond me. It's not Peter Crone's idea. I, for some reason, am able to tap into just what's truth. And so when people really hear that what happened, and it couldn't have happened any other way because it didn't, that the sigh of relief that most people get when they really let that land is the complete reconciliation of all their history. And that guy who tried to kill himself, he now, across all the scars, has that tattooed. So it's both symbolic of even the things that he did to try and end his own life were part of what happened, and it couldn't have been any different. So there's real surrender and forgiveness of himself for that. But there's also the covering up with the tattoo of letting go of his history. And, that moves me to tears when he sent the video and did a little story about everything. It was, I haven't even counted how many words that is, but it's not many, and for the fact that can truly inspire the most profound surrender in a human being who might have been suffering for decades. That's pretty cool.
Pretty amazing, actually. And yeah, there's so many people out there. I mean, I get a lot of direct messages of people in similar circumstances, being at that point where, they feel like the point of no return and they want to go, and they listen to a podcast or they hear one of my reels or they see one of my dancing videos, or even some of the comedy that I was doing a few years ago. And the comedy even was like there were so many people it was taking them out of their depression. And so the impact and power that we have to be able to, help people, do you ever become, because of the amount of power that you have in terms of, giving and serving and inspiring and giving that mental clarity to people, or that freedom, as you say, or that, helping them dissolve what they perceive to be an issue, right? Do you ever become just, because it's like a habit, right? It's part of like your paradigm that you live in now, because this is Peter Crone. This is what Peter Crone does. And it's like, do you have to remind yourself that, this is who you are, and not to take it for granted?
No, because I know it's not who I am. It's an extension of what I do. But who I am, without sounding too, highfalutin and philosophical, is really a space of possibility. That's who I am, right? So it just so happens that as an extension of that, of being the container of love, of freedom, of power, of value, one of the ways that I spend my time is helping people discover that within themselves. One of my catchphrases, again, I say, I can't give you something you don't already have. I'm just helping you reveal what's in the way of that, right? So it becomes an empowering conversation, whereas most people go and see experts or therapists or psychiatrists or spiritual teachers under the guise of, well, there's something wrong with me, and then there's this expert over there that's got the answers to help me. And that can, bring transitory relief, but you're then dependent on some external person to apparently help you. Now, I'm not naive to the fact that people come and they want help from me, but ultimately my greatest service is to give people the gift that I have, which means they no longer need me. My greatest gift really is to help people see that the only reason they need me is to show them that they don't need me.
That's powerful. Yeah, but the thing is, like, growth and transformation and healing is a process, right? It's, but it sounds to me like you've got this magic that can help people, like, very quickly. Am I right?
Instantaneous. When it's true transfiguration, it's instantaneous. Progress and a process tends to be in the current frequency that somebody's in, meaning there's an identity that they're collapsed with, that they associate with, and to improve that part of themselves, yes, that's process and progress. It's across time. But what I'm working with is not linear, it's vertical. So when there's the epiphany or the revelation of something that was never seen before, it's not a process at all. It's a shift in perspective, which is instantaneous. Now, within that new framework, there may be something else to work on of like, holy shit, like I thought for 40 years that I was not loved or I'm worthless, might be someone's deep narrative based on the fact that they had a sibling who was the athlete or the academic who got all the attention from the parents. And so they decided from a very young age that, I have no value because my sister, my brother, they're the cool one. And that's why they never got the job promotion, or they kept getting fired, or their relationships were always with people that they felt they, weren't loved by, or whatever it was. But once they see, like, that's not true, it's made up, there's nothing inadequate about me, that, first of all, is incredibly liberating and immensely powerful for that person. The next part is what I call practice. So you have awareness first, then you've got to practice living from that new perspective, because there's also something I call karmic momentum, which is the old version of you still might have a little bit of momentum where you might have a tendency to still attract a circumstance that was relative to who you were. But now that you realize, well, hang on a minute, it's not true that I'm worthless. I'm not worthless. That's a story. And when I live in that story, I feel like shit. I'm depressed. Life seems pointless. I consider taking my own life. I don't want to go out. Fuck, my business ideas, all of that. That lives in that world. But when you see that world of conversation is not a truth, then it's like, holy shit, like I could do anything. Now, that's exciting, but it still needs guidelines, right? It still needs support. So that's where the practicing of a new identity does exist in time. But the actual moment that I'm helping somebody transcend something is instantaneous. So it's subtle, but it's important to understand. Most people, the process they're on is trying to improve the version of themselves currently that's still limited, which is fine. You can become better, but still limited. Whereas I want to break people free, then the process they explore is very different. It's exploring a new identity. It's not trying to improve the old identity.
Yeah, thanks for bringing clarity to that, because as you're explaining yourself, I'm like, yeah, I completely understand, you know. And there is obviously that clarity that you give people. And then there's a process of, would you say unlearning, or a process of creation, right? A lot of people that, you know, I've worked with will say, you know, I just want to go back and be that happy version of me that I used to be before I went through this toxic relationship, or before this happened, or whatever. And I feel like I've just lost myself and whatever. And so I'm like, we don't want to go back to that happy person. That's an old version of you. What we really want to do, if you're not content and feeling like your true authentic self and feeling content and happy where you are right now, is to work on and process what it is that you're ruminating on, or that's really suppressed, or that you haven't healed and worked on, and then go forward and create this new version of yourself. And that's the process, because if you think about your mind and how powerful it is, where it just soaks in all these experiences and information and influences and things that you've gone through in the past, like that's all there. So in order for you to become this new version of yourself, there's always going to be this resistance, like a tug of war, like, hey, this is your past, you know, come here, don't go there. Then there's also the mental chatter of the fear of like you becoming this new version of yourself. And so there's a lot of resistance, but there is this constant like perseverance and process that you have to push forward to become this new version of yourself, because of the amount of subconscious programming and like just it can be just habits that you're so used to being this person, so used to listening to this voice, so used to having this story in your head, this dialogue that you're not intelligent, you're not beautiful, you're not enough, you feel inadequate constantly. And it makes sense, like what you're saying, because yeah, it is like I've had to. This is 5 years for me, Peter, and do I still have doubts? Do I still feel fear? Do I still sometimes doubt, feel that way? Absolutely. You know, every time I I felt a little bit nervous coming on with you today. And that is like something for me that is just part of, how I function, and connecting with people who are doing bigger things and meeting new people. It's like, I remember getting on an Instagram live 5 years ago with Evan Carmichael, and I was shitting myself, right? And it's always that perception of like making up the story that this person's more successful than me. And so it's like there's that inner child or inner version of me, younger version of me, the insecure version of me that's always like living in fear.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's just very human. We can say it's kind of adorable, right? And I appreciate you being so honest and vulnerable to, your audience, and I'm sure they're used to that. But it's very human, and we can have compassion for that. And I think, there is something that we all relate to in that, because we've all been there, even if Peter Crone at this point in his life doesn't have those experiences anymore. For sure I did. I mean, I was like the little kid that would hold on to his dad's leg. I mean, I was so shy. I was so nervous of everything. But I think as we evolve, as we get beyond those constraints of our own subconscious feelings of inadequacy and insecurity, who I am is complete. I'm part of life. There's nothing for me to fight. There's nothing for me to survive. Then those everyday human experiences, which are completely to be accepted and understood, but they tend to dissipate. For me, people often ask, well, when you do a big keynote and I'm speaking in front of 6,000 people here and there, or I'm going to a big event in June in Orlando where I'm speaking, or I held a retreat in England, and it's like, do you get nervous? And my usual response is, well, I'm not right now. We'll wait and see what happens, right? Because I'm not oblivious to the fact that, going back to my original story, I don't know what's going to happen. But typically, because I'm okay with any outcome, there is no nerves, right? So it's usually the part of us that's concerned about how do we look? We don't want to make a mistake. We don't want to look bad. These are very human primal traits that are, they warrant compassion. But it's not that, one of my distinctions I teach is the difference between caring and worrying. Because I was going to say, it's not like I don't care. I care so much. And so caring is heart-centric, right? I'm coming from love. Worry is in the mind, like where we're concerned about our own appearance and stuff like that. And look, even today I put stuff out that's really moving. I did a beautiful podcast with Aubrey Marcus and Vailana, his wife, that's so moving. And there's still people that comment like, oh, this guy is just so fucking full of himself, or whatever. It's just like, it's comical. It's like, you don't even know me. Like, it's just people have whatever they have to say. And it's like, have at it. Like, but when you get to a point of realizing you're totally at peace within yourself, then nothing triggers you. It's just noise. It's just what's happening.
Yeah, I think one of your quotes that you mentioned, whatever happened, happened and couldn't have happened because it didn't. That one I actually heard on that podcast that I think it was a couple of years ago with Aubrey.
Yeah, we've done a few now.
Yeah. And he's amazing as well. But it's pretty amazing listening to you and learning from you. And I can only imagine the people that, have worked with you or have been at your keynotes and have been at your masterminds, your retreats, how much they're, becoming aware of their own fears. And it's like, that's the one thing that, or fears or doubts or whatever it is that they've been carrying that you help them to dissolve. But that's the driver for me, like not letting that, like I'm speaking in Laguna Beach at the end of September. I've done all this work to become this version of me. And for me to say no to a speaking opportunity is ridiculous, but is there fear? Is there a bit of doubt? Absolutely. But I can't allow that to control me anymore. It's like every time I face someone who's triggered me, for example, I can't let it sit there because for years I let it sit there. For years I stayed quiet. So I believe, it's in that vulnerability, which I believe obviously that, I've heard it as a masculine man, being vulnerable can be seen as weak, but I use that as my superpower. To be real, because we're living in the ego as if like, nah, man, I'm good. I've got it all figured out. And I'm like, no, I don't. I used to be toxic. I used to be manipulative. I used to not give a shit about other people's feelings. I used to use drugs. And it's that authenticity and vulnerability that I believe is what we need more of in the world, because you're giving, it's almost like people see that authenticity and it's like giving them permission to go, if he can be like that, then so can I. So yeah, it's fighting those fears, but like just going back to triggers, because I know that you saying that you're at peace, actually gives me a lot of hope and inspires me, because I almost like, and I'm sure you've heard this in the whole personal development space as well, that you'll never be fully healed. And some people it can be the same as like you've been hurt in relationships or whatever you've gone through. And it's like, I'm not going to be in a relationship until I'm fully healed. Do you believe that? And obviously you've got to a really great place right now. And I've also said, because of what I'm experiencing, I'm only going off what I've experienced. I'm experiencing triggers. I get triggered by people. And every time I do that, I face it. I address it. I communicate so that I can heal that part, because every time I heal it, then guess what? Next time someone does that specific word or that specific comment or whatever, I'm like, whatever. I don't care. Like, to give you an example, just so I can give you some context, I'm sitting at dinner. I'm sitting at lunch. It's my mum's birthday. My brother-in-law is sitting next to me. My other brother-in-law is sitting next to me. And I just invested in a personal trainer because I want to take my physical side of, my body and build that and become stronger and healthier, obviously, because, and push me to new levels. And so he says to me, you're doing too much. He's like, I think you're doing too much. You're trying to manage your company. And I think, just getting a personal trainer and like training and like it's, you got other things to take care of. And I'm sitting there and I'm start to go red. My heart rate's freaking fight or flight. My hands are stunned. I'm just sitting there like this and I'm just looking at him, and then my other brother-in-law says, Luke, are you all right, man? You look stressed. And I'm like, yeah, I'm fucking stressed. I got shit going on. I'm flying away in a couple of days and I'm doing this. And that was the cover up. But about 5 minutes later, I had to say it. And I said, the reason why I'm stressed is because Andrew just triggered me. And then when I said that in front of him, I shared with him why he made me feel that way. And that it's like, because all my life it's always been, Luke needs to do this and you need to be like that and you need to do this and you need to go to church, and always being told what to do. Like I can't handle my own life. You know what I mean? I'm not responsible enough to be able to manage my life and to do, so I need people to tell me, right? And it's always coming from love and care. No one's ever like trying to hurt me. And then what happened? He was apologetic. He was loving on me because he didn't mean to do that. He didn't realize that was going to happen. But every time I do that, and what does it do? It creates a deeper connection with us, where there's more love because there's more communication, there's more appreciation for each other's feelings. As I continue to experience these triggers, Peter, as I'm growing and who I am today, you sharing what you're sharing with me, I'm like, wow, okay. So maybe in 10 years' time, I'll also be at that place where I would have worked through a lot, or I don't know. What are your thoughts? Like,
I mean, first of all, again, as I said, I think it's beautiful that you can share yourself so openly, whether it's in this conversation to help your listeners or to just be honest with your brother-in-laws and Andrew, right? But a couple of things I would point out that would probably help you collapse 10 years, hopefully to less than that, to get to the place of peace, is to realize that Andrew didn't trigger you. Andrew said something. The trigger was in you, the way that you interpreted him saying, well, you're doing too much and da-da-da. That's all he said. It's like, and I get what he's saying, and as you said, it's coming from a position of love and he cares about you. But you getting angry or you getting heated and you getting like ready to explode, that's a reflection of the Luke that you just kind of gave me enough information to understand, is always worried about if he's doing something wrong, right? Or always trying to do everything right based on your condition. You've got to do this, go to church, da-da-da, right? So your conditioning, for whatever it's worth, just to give you my insight about your own identity, is that there's a deep fear of like doing something wrong, right? Little Luke, little boy, has heard, because you're the youngest, you've got the 3 old sisters, now they've got their husbands, you've got your parents. So you've been the runt of the litter and you've been told what to do. And so your interpretation is, I've got to do what everyone else tells me to do. Something like that, right? And as a good kid with a big heart who's very sensitive, you've always wanted to make sure you don't do something wrong. So here you are at lunch and Andrew says, blah, blah, blah. And what gets triggered is it's not from him. He's just made a noise. Going back to the quote that you liked of mine, where life will present you with people and circumstances to reveal where you're not free. Well, here's a perfect example. You're not free when it comes to people telling you or making a suggestion. Why? Because it triggers a part of you where you're concerned that you're not doing something right. But that's in you, that's not over there. And when you get that, that's where the freedom lies, to realize you've never done anything wrong, you can't do anything wrong, you're just going to do what you do, and some things work out and some things don't. There's consequences to action, all of them. There's nothing wrong with doing heroin, but there's going to be some consequences depending on how strong your constitution is. If you're weak and you're frail, you're probably going to die pretty quickly. If you're built like an ox, maybe you get away with it for a few years. It's not wrong, that's a moral story. So that would be my reflection for you. And hopefully there's something you can get from that no one has ever triggered you. So there's nothing to heal from. What the opportunity is to listen to what triggers in you that gets quote unquote turned on by somebody saying or doing something. That immediately gets you out of the victim mindset. Now, I acknowledge you for like being honest with Andrew and saying da da da, and he apologized. That speaks volumes about your family and how he cares. But it's just not accurate, and it would leave him maybe feeling guilty. Whereas the gift is he said something and revealed the fact that you still think that you can't do what you want to do. And it's like, Andrew, thank you for sharing. I appreciate it. I know you love me and you're worried that I'm spreading myself too thin or whatever, but I'm excited. I'm really pumped to get this trainer. You know, so do you see that's a different response? It's not a reaction based on your own conditioning. It's like you appreciate his sharing. It's like someone calls me, as I said earlier, you're a fucking idiot. Okay, well, thank you so much for sharing. I don't know where you got that from, but I appreciate your honesty. Maybe I can share some things to upgrade your view of me. If not, that's fine too, you know. But there's no trigger, do you see? So maybe right there you can find some more freedom for yourself to realize no one triggers us. We trigger us. And that right there is where we get power and responsibility back.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And I can appreciate your explanation. I guess the challenge for many people is the response of the body in the experience. So whether it's somebody else's making the noise, as you say, but it's the reaction, right? And you know, the debilitating state that some of us go into when that happens. That's absolutely. I remember, look at this example, right? I'm driving, a Middle Eastern dude drives up next to me. I'm probably early 20s. And maybe I cut him off or something. And the way he looked at me was like he wanted to murder me. And I felt so threatened. Yeah. And that triggered me. Like I was so scared. Yeah. Just from that, you know, and that's the younger version of me that was just always so afraid.
Yeah. You know? And we all are built to survive, right? So I get it. And listen, it's a beautiful reminder for people that when they do get, quote unquote, that experience physiologically, it's a reaction, as you said. What I'm encouraging people to understand is that when that reaction happens, fine, you're in it. It's like if you've had, 6 pops and you're drunk, no one can mentally talk themselves out of it, right? You've got alcohol in your system and you're going to have to wait for that chemistry to change. Same with our body when we go into fight or flight. Cortisol, epinephrine, adrenaline, it's all pumped into your blood circulation and you can't just suddenly go, oh no, I'm fine, because your body is now in an altered state. What you can do is in reflection, when you calm down, and you did a good job of explaining to Andrew how you felt, but then now, maybe through this relationship, go, oh yeah, hang on a minute. Like my conditioning created that chemistry. It wasn't Andrew. And if I realize that why I did that, now you have some access to power, right? So what you could do, for example, and I'm not saying you should, but if you were working with me, I would encourage you to call Andrew sometime and say, Andrew, hey, you remember when we met for Mum's birthday and you said something about me and the trainer and I got upset and I pretended it was because I was stressed because I was flying, and I really realized something. And I first of all, I thank you for saying sorry, but you just said something because you care about me. And what I realized is the reason I got upset is because I have, since I was a kid, always worried that I have to do what everyone else tells me to do. And that was the reaction. Now, do you see, you're out of the physical state of chemistry of reaction. So you're in a normalized, you're centered, but you can upgrade your psychological way of relating to life by having a conversation like that. You don't have to have it with him. You might just, through this discourse with me right now, realize, oh, wow, I don't need to react because people can tell me whatever the fuck they want to tell me. And it's not that you're like a badass and you're telling them to take a hike, but, I'll take it on. And if it resonates with me, maybe I will listen. If it doesn't, then they're just sharing their opinion and that's fine. So that's the difference is, yes, when you're in it, you're in it. Fine. Compassion, love, and hopefully you can learn something from it. But then when you're out of that biological shift in chemistry, and you're back to homeostasis or a point of neutral, then you can revisit that and go, okay, what actually happened there? Why did I get so heated? Oh, wow, I can see that I've got this old trigger. So that's the opportunity for real ascension and growth, is to, yes, when you're triggered, you're in it. I get it. The dude next to you looks like he's about to kill you. Yeah, that's scary. I've been there myself, and your body goes into a real fight or flight threatened response. And that we could argue is a much more threatening situation than you having lunch with Andrew, but it still nonetheless elicits the same biochemical shitstorm that happens, not because you're literally being threatened by Andrew, but your conditioning interprets it that way. And that's the opportunity. Like if I'm out on the street and someone comes at me with a knife, Peter Crone, I want my body to release adrenaline and cortisol because I'm more likely to survive, right? So I want the shift in chemistry. But when we're in a benign situation that isn't life-threatening, obviously most people don't want to have to go to that place just because of their own conditioning. And that's where we can transcend that when you understand it and reflect back.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation to communicate further, because even that for me to do that with my brother-in-law would be very healing, and it's something that I would actually I'd encourage my if I was helping my clients as well, I'd tell them to do the same thing, and I would actually go and do that. But I have a very big hunch that my sister's listening to this, Christine, and she works with me as well, and she's probably heard me say his name, and she's like got the phone straight away or whatever, and she's like, "Here, listen, they're talking about you."
So you don't even need to.
Yeah, so he's probably already heard it, and but I still will, if just in case, just in case,
because it's the exercise for you, right? It's twofold. One, you get to be responsible, which is the access to power. You go, wow, Anna, hang on a minute, like Andrew didn't trigger me. Andrew said something, and we could question his motive, but it sounds like just because he loves you, you're a brother-in-law, right? He's married to your sister. He cares about you. And what he was saying was a reflection of the fact that he thinks you're overdoing it, right? Coming from care. Now, I would assert on a much more esoteric level, on the karmic journey of Luke, you still attract that conversation because you haven't let go of the idea that you think deep down you're supposed to do what people tell you to do. Right? Do you understand? So that's a much subtler understanding of the energetics of how human dynamics work, which is you're carrying the trigger. So to go back to my quote, life will present you with people and circumstances to reveal where you're not free. Well, that's revealing where you're not free. As soon as you overcome that, the Andrews of the world will probably not say those things. Why? Because you don't need to look at it anymore.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. But there's like a lot of my... and that's why I was asking you, because I was like, what is it that like drives you? What's your why, right? Mm-hmm. What is that deeper rooted like drive for you to like continue to grow and achieve your success and make the impact that you're making? And a lot of my drive is from being judged, from being bullied, from being triggered constantly, and like even from my mother, and it's like, no, I'm not gonna conform. I'm not gonna be like other people. I'm not gonna do what other people want me to do. And a lot of my motivation is from all these experiences,
Yeah, and that's clearly your life's path, right? Is that you're here to learn that it's not incumbent upon you to do what you think you have to do based on the opinions of others. That's your lesson. It's no surprise you came in as the youngest. Your eldest sister has a different thing that she's dealing with, right? She might feel the pressure of perfectionism because she's the first, and I don't know what she deals with. But, you're the youngest, and so it seems like you have to fall in line with other people's opinions. And what you're learning in this incarnation, without sounding too esoteric, is that you get to choose the life that you want, even in the face of people saying you shouldn't do that. Well, I appreciate you sharing, and I know it's because you love me, but this is a choice I'm making for myself. That's both respecting, but also empowering for yourself.
Yeah. I don't think I've ever heard anyone give the clarity that you've just given us in regards to this emotional response, this fight or flight triggers that we deal with. And so I want to thank you for going deeper with that, because so many people deal with it. So many people go through it. And for many, many years, I never understood it. And I could not understand why my body would react the way that it did, why I would retreat every single time. I was always that, not the fighter, the quiet, the lover, not the fighter. I'm a gentle, 6'2". I'm a gentle giant.
I see that. Yeah.
But I'm grateful that I'm as tall as I am, because I got to tell you, it's worked in my favor for a few times,
absolutely.
Yeah, but there's a couple of
clarity was there, and hopefully it made a difference for you. And my why is to inspire more freedom in people, and hopefully today both you and your listeners got some of that.
Absolutely. Though there's just a couple of things I quickly want to touch on. Self-love, that is for me one of the major keys to anyone's life, is having a healthy, strong, loving relationship with yourself. How do you incorporate that into your life?
I mean, it's integrated at this point. It's so natural. It's self-love is misunderstood, I think, because people look at it in a way that it's sort of very woo-woo and, self-development. And for me, self-love is really, at the most profound level, is embracing your humanity. It's incorporating the part of you that is scared, the little child, the little Luke that thinks that he has to do what everyone says, who thinks he's rejected. The love is not because you're 6'2" and you're in good shape. The love that you're bringing is to the part of you that feels scared, that feels insecure, that feels inadequate. That's self-love.
Powerful stuff. Very simple, but powerful. Thank you, Peter. I appreciate that. And guys, if you're tuning in right now, make sure you go on Instagram and you hit that follow button and type in Peter's Instagram handle, which I believe is your first and last name.
Yep.
Absolutely. But where can people find you on stage, events, stuff that you're doing?
Yeah, we don't have any live events coming up other than, me being paid to go and speak at companies or keynotes. I'm looking forward to doing a live event. People, I did something for Aubrey actually in Austin where I spoke, and it was just so fun to be with a few hundred people, and I enjoy that interaction. So we'll do something. But the best way to keep in touch is through Instagram, because everything gets announced there, but also to join the mailing list on my website, which is also just petercrone.com. So that will always be the way that we announce anything that's coming up, whether it's a workshop, a mastermind, a live event, etc., etc. So they're the two main places, Instagram and then my website.
Amazing. Peter, thank you. And thank you is not really enough, but what you've shared with us over the last 60 minutes or so has been freaking extraordinary, profound, prolific, phenomenal. It's such a blessing to have you on this podcast, on my podcast. I was manifesting this for quite some time. So I'm very grateful, and no doubt we'll keep in touch. I know that I am also manifesting working with you, hopefully in the near future, which I feel, because I just know that there's so much for me. There's so much more work that I need to do for myself as well, and when I connected with you a couple of years ago, that's what I was telling my best friend. I was like, I'm going to work with him. I'm going to work with him, so it's been a blessing to have you on the podcast. And I know that everybody tuning in would have and has been inspired and has taken away so much from your wisdom and your power. So thank you. Keep being the change, because we freaking need it. So it's been a blessing. Thanks, Peter.
Luke, thank you, mate. You're a sweetheart, and it's been my honor to be on your show. And I look forward to supporting you and whoever as much as I can over the coming years. And I appreciate the kind words, and your audience is lucky to have someone like you who speaks from the heart and is committed to making a difference. And I hope that I contributed to that mission.
Thank you for joining me on this journey of self-discovery and growth. If you're ready to grow and reach your full potential and find inner peace, send me a DM that says, I want inner peace, and I'll send you the next steps. You can accomplish anything you set your mind to. When you change your mind, you change your whole life. So don't hesitate and send that DM over to me. Myself and my team can't wait to meet you and witness your transformation in full glory. See you next week.